Hi, my name is Caitlin Fry, and this is my photographer presentation. I'm doing mine on Margaret Bourke-White. To begin, I have a quote from her, which reads, "The camera is a remarkable instrument. Saturate yourself with your subject, and the camera will all but take you by the hand and point the way." This one really stuck out to me, so I wanted to include this one to kind of start off the presentation. So, who is Margaret Bourke-White? So, Margaret Bourke-White was an American documentary photographer who's known for leading many first accomplishments for females in photography. She was the first female photographer published in Life magazine, as well as the first female photographer to be accredited by the U.S. Army. Her accomplishments are so widely known because of her various strides made in the photography world. She really paved the way for female photographers in the world of photojournalism, and made history for female photographers in general. And this is the lovely photo of Margaret in July 1946. So in her early days, Margaret was born in the Bronx, New York on June 14th, 1904. She was an adventurous young girl and was really wanting to explore the world. She often used to tell her parents when she was growing up that she wanted to be a scientist because of her love for nature and kind of the world around her. So growing up, she always knew she wanted to live her life to the fullest and make a difference in the world in some way. Her mother encouraged this, and her father was actually into photography himself and was always experimenting with cameras when she was younger. But this being said, Margaret actually did not pick up her first camera until after her father's death, which was in 1920. Then she received her first camera from her mother in the year 1921, which is when she also began her education at Columbia University. Her first lens was actually $20 and it was cracked, or her first camera was $20 and it had a cracked lens, but nonetheless, she started her photography courses that way. So throughout her college career, Margaret actually attended 7 universities. There she studied a variety of different things throughout her 7 years, or 7 universities. These included photography, of course, art, swimming, zoology, and paleontology, so you could say she was very well versed. At her final school, Cornell, she had a difficult time finding a job after graduation and was presented the opportunity to photograph the campus and sell images. This sparked the attention of magazines and a lot of architecture offices. She was commissioned for capturing the industrial age for magazines such as Life magazine, and as well worked for other big name companies. This kind of led to her start as a foreign photographer. So in 1930, Margaret became the first foreign photographer to have access to the Soviet Union. In a 1935 poll, she was named one of the 20 most notable American women, and in 1936, she was named one of 10. Being in the Soviet Union is really what transformed Margaret into more social documentary style photography. She began to notice people in a more emotional way, and this really impacted her journey to photograph individuals in these elements. This is also what kind of transpired to her work in World War II as well, because she stayed over there for many years as well. So now I'm going to go through a couple of her most famous images through her foreign photography. So this one is of Stalin, and it was in Life magazine in 1943. Margaret traveled to the Soviet Union during 3 consecutive summers, 1930 through 1932. She did this to document the first 5-year plan, which was initiated by Joseph Stalin, who's in this image. And this is where their nation began transitioning from an agriculture society to more of an industrial center. There, Margaret photographed a lot of things throughout the Soviet Union, and these actually included some of Stalin's family members as well, including his mother. The next image is another really popular image. This is of Gandhi. So this one's really interesting to me. So while she was taking this, there were actually 2 conditions that she was told, which was 1, she was not allowed to speak to him because it was his day of silence, and 2, she was not allowed to use artificial light. So somehow, some way, the hut that he was in, that she was trying to peek through, was so dark, so she could not see him and her camera at all. So she somehow convinced them to let her use 3 bulbs to take this image quickly. Margaret reported that this was one of her most difficult images to capture, especially given that it was taken in India, so there was a lot of moisture in the air, which made kind of all of the elements difficult for her. This next image is a famous one during World War II. This is at the Camp Buchenwald. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this particular image was in April 1945, and it shows survivors of Buchenwald kind of staring out at their Allied rescuers. And then this is another image during the liberation by U.S. forces. This one was April 28th, 1945. So as you can see, Margaret spent a lot of time really behind enemy lines at some of these places and really was able to capture a lot of emotion through most of these images. So while she's really known for a lot of this work in the war and in the Soviet Union, she also has a lot of images that are more like artistic outside of the war. So I'm going to highlight some of those. This one is of just a really beautiful image of a ballerina in Russia in 1931. This image, she did a lot of bird's eye views. If you kind of look up her work, that's a lot of what comes up. A lot of these were for her magazine work. This one specifically was of Manhattan in 1934. I really love this image because it really captures, to me, I feel like New York as an essence, and it's really interesting to see it from the bird's eye point of view. This last image here is an image of an approaching storm in 1954, and I believe this was in Colorado. So to kind of sum up, this is an image of Margaret Bourke-White just about to go on one of her combat missions for World War II. This is just a really beautiful photo to me. It really captures kind of her adventurous side. And it's really also neat because she was the first authorized to fly on a combat mission. And then to finally sum it up, I have another quote from her which reads, "If you want to photograph a man spinning, give some thought to why he spins. Understanding for a photographer is as important as the equipment he uses." I found this really empowering to hear because it really is true that as photographers, we really need to be aware of what's actually happening around us, and I believe that understanding is ultimately what gives us the images that we do.